Hello there and welcome to the Week in Parliament. On this programme, the government accepts demands to publish a plan before it begins formal talks on leaving the EU. But ministers insist they need to keep some of the details to themselves.
It's normal even for basic trade negotiations to be carried out with a degree of secrecy,
Also on this programme, MPs listen in silence as one member recounts the day that she was raped.
I didn't tell my mother, I didn't tell my father, I didn't tell my friends, and I didn't tell the police.
We talked to two new MPs about what it's like to join the Commons 18 months after a general election. And as the size of the House of Lords tops 800, we speak to a leading Conservative peer who thinks it's time for them to cut their numbers.
The current size of the House of Commons is 650. I think we should aim for 600, size of the House of Commons in the next Parliament.
But first, with Theresa May out of the country, it fell to the Leader of the Commons, David Lidington, to stand in at the dispatch box at Prime Minister's questions. The session took place just ahead of a 6-hour debate on the UK's exit from the EU, in which Labour had tabled a motion calling on the government to publish a plan for Brexit before the start of formal negotiations. Newspapers suggested that as many as 40 Conservative MPs might rebel and back Labour's call. And so Theresa May decided to agree to that demand, but put forward an amendment asking MPs to support her timetable for starting the talks. The Shadow Foreign Secretary picked up on Theresa May's change of heart.
We welcome the government's decision to accept our motion today that they will show Parliament their plan for Brexit before Article 50 is triggered. So can I ask the Leader of the House one central question about this plan? Does the government want the UK to remain part of the customs union?
The government has always made it clear that we would seek to give additional clarity about our position at the earliest opportunity. But it's been the case, as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has said many times, that one of our core objectives is going to be to secure the maximum freedom for British companies both to have access to and operate within the single European market.
We have a government that cannot tell us the plan because they do not have a plan. They do not have a plan. In February, the Leader of the House said, when he was hearing about what he was hearing about from the Leave campaign was confusing, contradictory nonsense. My final question is this: Are we hearing anything different from this government today?
Mr. Speaker, we will publish before Article 50 is triggered a statement about our negotiating strategy and objectives, as the Prime Minister has said yesterday. But the Honourable Lady seems again to be in a state of utter denial about the consequences that flow from the referendum decision.
He accused Labour of being in disarray.
It's like it's quarrelling like mutiny on the Bounty as reshot by the Carry On team.
Well, shortly after those exchanges, the Brexit debate got underway.
The purpose of this motion, calling for a plan, is not to frustrate or delay the process. That is not the purpose. That is not why we're calling for a plan. It does present a challenge for the government, because it now means the government's got to produce a plan in good time to allow the proper formalities and processes to be gone through.
It's widely accepted that the negotiation of our departure from the European Union is the most important and most complex negotiation in modern times. And it's overwhelmingly important that we get it right. I think that is common ground. It's normal even for basic trade negotiations to be carried out with a degree of secrecy,
The language used is the rather vague one of a plan. Well, we'll probably be told the plan is to have a red, white and blue Brexit, and that we are believers in free trade whilst giving up all the conditions that govern free trade in the single market.
And can I say, the honourable member is no longer in his place, but to say that it might consist of hints, I would merely remind the House that when Moses came down from the mountain bearing the tablets, it did not contain the 10 hints. He was pretty clear. He was pretty clear about what he was telling people what to do.
All of a sudden, we see the issue of parliamentary oversight being used, in effect, as a brake against taking back control, a brake against bringing our democracy home. Once again, the Labour frontbench sides with the supranational elites. They're out to try to frustrate and overturn the way people voted in June.
It is 167 days, almost 6 months, since the referendum, and we have 113 days to go until the 31st of March deadline that the government has set itself. We're almost two-thirds of the way there. To talk about a glacial pace of progress might be something of an overstatement in this case.
This Parliament has the opportunity to shape, to shape an economic policy and an immigration policy and a knowledge policy which can make us once again a world beater. But if we do not take that opportunity, if instead we concentrate on seeking to dilute the result of the referendum, then I'm afraid we will fail the people of this country at this historic moment.
Michael Gove. Now, an MP has moved colleagues to tears after revealing she was raped at 14. Michelle Thompson shared her personal story during a Commons debate focused on the UN International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women.
And I wanted to give a very personal perspective to help people in this place and outside understand one element of sexual violence against women. When I was 14, I was raped. As is common, it was by somebody who was known to me. He had offered to walk me home from a youth event, and in those days, everybody walked everywhere. It was quite common to do that. It was early evening, it wasn't dark. I was wearing, I'm guessing, jeans and a sweatshirt. I knew my way around where I lived. I was very comfortable, and we did go a slightly different way, but I didn't think anything of it. He asked me, he told me he wanted to show me something in a wooded area, and at that point, I must admit, I was alarmed. I did have a warning bell, but I overrode that warning bell because I knew him, and therefore there was a level of trust in place. And to be honest, looking back at that point, I don't think I knew what rape was. It was not something that was talked about. My mother never talked to me about it. I didn't hear other girls or other women talking about it. It was mercifully quick, and I remember, first of all, feeling surprise, then fear, then horror, as I realised I quite simply couldn't escape. Afterwards, I walked home alone. I was crying, I was cold, and I was shivering, and I now realise, of course, that was the shock response. I didn't tell my mother, I didn't tell my father, I didn't tell my friends, and I didn't tell the police. I bottled it all up inside me. I hoped briefly and appallingly that I might be pregnant so that that would force a situation to help me control it. And of course, without support, the capacity and resources I had within me to process it were very limited. I was very ashamed. I was ashamed that I had allowed this to happen to me. And I had a whole range of internal conversations about, I should have known. Why did I go that way? Why did I walk home with him? Why didn't I understand the danger? I deserved it because I was too this, I was too that. I felt that I was spoiled and impure. And I really felt revulsion towards myself. One thing I realise now is that I'm not scared, and he was. I'm not scared, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor.
Thank the Honourable Lady for what she has said and the way in which she said it, which has left an indelible impression upon us all.
The debate had been tabled by a Labour MP.
Worldwide, an estimated 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence. That is a staggering statistic. Each year in the UK, up to 3 million women experience violence, and on average, 1 woman dies in Britain at the hands of a man every 3 days.
The government was defeated in the Lords when peers demanded some families involved in inquests have access to the same public funding as the police. The subject came up during detailed debate on the Policing and Crime Bill.
Public money should pay to establish the truth, and it's surely not right and surely not justice when bereaved families trying to find out the truth and who've not done anything wrong find that taxpayers' money is being used by the other side to sometimes paint a very different picture of events in a bid to destroy their credibility.
But the minister said there'd be cost implications of the change.
In the last financial year, 200 persons died following contact with the police. All of those deaths would have been subject to an inquest. Of course, my lords, the financial implications of this amendment is but one of the matters which noble lords will wish to take into consideration, but we cannot be blind to the impact on the public purse.
But when it came to the vote, the government was defeated by 243 votes to 208. Ministers will now seek to overturn the amendment at a later stage. Now, in recent weeks, we've had a handful of new MPs elected to the Commons. The newest is Caroline Johnson, who won Thursday's by-election in the safe Conservative seat of Sleaford and North Hykeham, caused by the resignation of the sitting MP. Meanwhile, on Monday, the Lib Dems' Sarah Olney took her seat in the Commons after winning the Richmond Park by-election, forced by the resignation of Zac Goldsmith. And there have been two other new arrivals in recent weeks. Tracy Brabin held the seat of Batley and Spen for Labour following the murder of Joe Cox. And the Conservative Robert Courts kept Witney for the Conservatives after David Cameron's departure. I invited them both into the studio earlier and began by asking Tracy Brabin what it was like to arrive in Parliament 18 months after a general election.
Well, obviously the circumstances in which I arrived are probably very different, in that there was a lot of love. And there was a lot of desire for me to do well, and very much a welcome even before I arrived. And certainly to get a round of applause after my maiden speech, it was a real, it's unusual in the House of Commons for people to clap. So there was a real sense of, we're behind you, given the circumstances.
Now, Robert, you took over the most famous seat in the country, if you like. What were your impressions when you arrived at Westminster?
Well, there's two things really that very much are on your mind. Firstly, you look around, there's the wonderful surroundings and all the history. But apart from anything else, the main thing is always that you've got an enormous responsibility because you're conscious that the people of your constituency, I'm sure Tracy feels the same, have put enormous trust in you, and you really want to make sure that you hit the ground running so that you're out and doing things to help them as soon as you can.
Now, you took, it struck me, slightly different approaches to this because, Tracy Brabin, you popped up very quickly and you were asking questions and you made your speech quite quickly. Robert, you hung on a little bit. So what was the thinking behind that? Did you particularly want to hit the ground running?
I mean, it's my personality. I do everything, it's 100%. I'm going to keep going to this till someone says, don't, stop. So I've asked loads of questions. I've been on a bill committee. I've tabled an amendment. I've had a trip to Kurdistan. I just feel it's such a privilege that every day counts.
Robert, it strikes me you took a slightly more lawyerly approach and you thought about it and then you got involved.
Well, it really is. My first words in the House were Prime Minister's questions after only about 10 days. So that was my first, but I didn't make my maiden speech indeed for about a month. And that's simply because I took the view that I wanted to just sit and observe the House and understand the way that people speak and the way that people go about things before I made my maiden speech. And of course, November the 30th was Winston Churchill's birthday, and because he was born and is buried in my constituency, there was nice timing there, which I thought would be appropriate.
Now, I'm interested in how you think, or whether you think, your previous careers prepared you or didn't prepare you for a life in Parliament. Now, Robert, you've got a fairly traditional route in as much as there are quite a lot of barristers in the Commons, but does it help?
Yes, it does. I had really a twin career before I arrived here. Firstly as a district councillor and secondly as a barrister. The link, of course, for being a councillor to being an MP is clear because it's casework and it's helping people, it's representing people, so that really is quite clear. And as far as the bar's concerned, yes, primarily in terms of getting a hold of a brief and assimilating it quickly and picking out the main points. That's the way it really helps you. More that, in fact, than the public speaking, which is quite a different skill.
Now, Tracy, it might surprise people, but there are actually rather more actors in the Commons than most people might realise. So there's yourself, there's Deirdre Brock, there's Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, there are one or two others. There are a few, and they say that it's a really good skill because you can talk, you're very good at projecting your voice, at getting points across. Do you find it has helped?
I think confidence in front of a group of people and public speaking obviously is helpful, having an actor background. Being a writer as well does help, but actually writing a speech that has impact and power and reflects your constituents' feelings is quite a different skill to, say, writing Hollyoaks or Shameless or Tracy Beaker or something like that. So I'm really learning on the job as well.
But you must both find yourself, in a way, surprised to be here? Obviously, neither of you, 2 or 3 years ago, could possibly have foreseen that you'd be sitting in these seats.
Yes, there is a real learning curve, and you very much have to hit the ground running because you don't have the preparation of knowing when it's going to be, in the same way as you would, of course, if you'd stood at a general election where you have a lead-in period.
And Tracy, for you, the most conflicting emotions?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's not much joy in it, but there's a lot of pride, you know, but because obviously the circumstances are so horrible. But having been a campaigner, an activist, trade unionist for decades, and people may not know that about, you know, my past, it does feel like all roads have led here. And, you know, Batley and Spence, my hometown, I campaigned with Joe. You know, I really feel connected to the community and the people I love. So I'm not surprised I'm here, but obviously it's, in a way, I'd rather not be here. But, you know, I'm here now and, you know, I'm going to be the best MP I can be.
All right, just finally, brief one to both of you. What's your ambition? What do you want to do?
I want to be an excellent and outstanding MP for the residents
all
of West
MPs say that. What do you really want to do?
It's true. It really is true. Just like Tracy, I live in the area that I represent. So I live in Blaydon, so I love the area that I'm in, and that's exactly what I want to do. It's what I did as a district councillor, and it's what I want to do now.
Tracy, what do you
Well, do you know what I really want to do? I really want to understand Parliament. I want to be one of the finest parliamentarians, so I understand how to table a bill or how to get a law passed. Because if you don't know that, you can't actually make the most of it because you're just beholden to other people who could guide you. You know, you see a problem and then you can see a parliamentary way to deal with it. Now, that's a great skill.
All right, well, we'll have you back to see how you're both doing. Tracy Brabin, Robert Courts, thank you very much indeed for coming into the programme.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Now let's take a look at some of the other news from around Westminster in brief. The Transport Secretary has set out plans to overhaul the way England's railway network is run. Chris Grayling wants the public body, Network Rail, which looks after infrastructure, to work more closely with the private companies which run the trains. But Labour demanded a different solution.
It is time for our railways to be run under public ownership in the public interest as an integrated national asset in public hands with affordable fares for all and long-term investment in the railway network.
With the party opposite, they always just want to turn the clock back. Yeah. They want to turn the clock back to the days, Mr Speaker, of British Rail and unions having beer and sandwiches in number 10.
There was a rare round of applause in the Commons on Wednesday for a special guest in the public gallery. 90-year-old Holocaust survivor Kitty Hart-Moxon was watching MPs at Prime Minister's questions. She was applauded for her life's work raising awareness of the Holocaust. The Communities Secretary has told MPs that too many UK politicians have refused to tackle integration problems as they feared being called a racist. Sajid Javid was responding to a report by Dame Louise Casey on integration. She concluded that segregation and social exclusion are at worrying levels and are fueling inequality in some areas.
For too long, too many people in this country have been living parallel lives, refusing to integrate and failing to embrace the shared values that make Britain great. And for too long, too many politicians in this country have refused to deal with the problem.
I am concerned that there is no real understanding in this report of the simple truth that integration is a two-way street, and it should definitely not be used, as it so often is, as a stick with which to beat the minority communities of Britain.
A Conservative is calling for the UK to plant more trees. Chris Davis says just 10% of England is given over to woodland, compared to 18% in Scotland and a European average of 37%.
The Worldwide Fund for Nature has calculated that global demand for timber, paper and energy from forests is set to triple by 2050. So if we don't plant more trees now, and if we continue to rely on imports, then the UK is going to be competing against other growing economies for a natural resource that we can, and indeed perhaps should, grow more of at home.
Now let's take a look at some of the other political headlines this week. It's time for our countdown. Here's Gary Connor.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Nigel Farage was the only UK politician to be nominated for Time magazine's Person of the Year. But he was pipped to the post by his old friend Donald Trump. 4. In a Commons debate on Brexit, vocal Eurosceptic Sir Bill Cash revealed that in 1975 he voted yes to Europe, to the surprise of fellow MP Ken Clarke.
3.
Scotland's Transport Minister has been caught driving a car without the proper insurance. Humza Yousaf said that a misunderstanding caused the honest mistake and he would take any penalty imposed upon him. When answering a question on preventing banned items being dropped into prisons, Justice Secretary Liz Truss revealed that some new deterrents were being used.
I was at HMP Pentonville last week. They've now got patrol dogs who are barking, which helps deter drones.
And what's on the menu at the Prime Minister's house on Christmas Day? Theresa May told the Radio Times that she'll be going to church, cooking goose, and tuning into Doctor Who.
Gary Connor. Now, let's go off to the House of Lords, where on Friday peers debated a plan that would effectively phase out the remaining 97 hereditary peers. It was the second time in a week they discussed just how big the House of Lords should be. According to our Erminometer, membership of the House of Lords currently stands at 809, making it the second largest legislative body in the world. On Monday, the Conservative Lord Cormack led a debate on how to reduce its size, and afterwards I asked him if we were really going to see change this time.
What we want is a select committee which has the power to summon witnesses, to take evidence and to make recommendations to the House of Lords. And I very much hope that by the end of next year we will have had such a committee, it will have made a report, and the House of Lords will have accepted or rejected, and I very much hope accepted, the recommendations.
There are 800 plus members of the House of Lords. Couldn't you just say, we'll keep the same proportions but halve the numbers, and the groups could decide amongst themselves who stays and who goes, and you could do that within a year?
Well, of course we could do that within a year, and we have to see whether that may be the recommendation from the Select Committee. But there are various ways of doing this. We say, first of all, that the House of Lords should not be bigger than the House of Commons. In other words, there should be a maximum of 600, because that will be the size of the House of Commons in 2020. Secondly, there must be a minimum 20% crossbenchers, fully independent peers, because that is the distinguishing feature of the House of Lords in comparison with the House of Commons. Thirdly, we must not have any party with a majority over the other political parties. And fourthly, and most important of all, we acknowledge the supremacy of the elected House, which has the final word, the final say in everything.
Just finally then, how much money would you put on the House of Lords being significantly, say 200 or 300 members smaller by the end of this Parliament?
Well, if we're going to get down to what we think is right, the current size of the House of Commons is 650. I think we should aim for 600, size of the House of Commons in the next Parliament.
But would you put a tenner on it? I
certainly would put a tenner on it. I'm not a betting man, but yes, I would put a tenner on it. I might even put a little more on it.
Lord Cormack on his hopes for the House of Lords. 80 years ago this weekend, news of a royal romance gripped Britain. The King, Edward VIII, wished to marry an American divorcee, Wallis Simpson, and was prepared to renounce the throne. The affair had made headlines around the world, but the British press kept silent about it until early December 1936. As Caroline Quinn reports, it was in October that the government heard that Mrs Simpson was set to divorce her second husband, leaving her free to marry again.
The Simpson divorce case was heard at Ipswich Assizes, some distance from London, but not too far for the foreign press to travel.
This is the edition for Wednesday, the 28th of October 1936, 5 weeks before the story of the relationship between Edward and Mrs Simpson appeared in British newspapers. And it's reporting, banner headline, surprise in London. Press and radio in the United States are announcing the marriage of Edward VIII to an American woman.
No, there was worry about Mrs Simpson, the connections that she might have. She was also thought to be unduly sympathetic to the Nazi regime in Germany. Of course, a point made about Edward VIII himself. But her life, with 2 husbands living, the gossip that surrounded her, was this woman a security threat
One possible explanation is that the hard men in Whitehall were thinking people are going to use this crisis, or this potential crisis, as a lever for almost a coup d'etat.
And you can watch more of that in A Very British Crisis on BBC Parliament on Saturday night at 8 p.m. But that's it from me for now. Joanna Shin will be with you on Monday night at 11 for another roundup of the day here at Westminster. But for now, from me, Alicia McCarthy, goodbye.